Good morning, everyone. It is such a joy to be with all of you today. I think, Madeline, are we ready to get started? Because I know we said we'll pause. Okay, perfect. Well, good morning. It is so good to be with you. I think Madeline mentioned it, but we've got a few more people coming in, a bit of housekeeping. Please utilize the chat. This is formatted as a webinar because we want to share a sacred space with each of you in a virtual setting. So at this time, if you haven't done so already, please state your name, organization, where you're located in South Carolina, so that our guests can further understand just how amazing you all are. Additionally, please state if you have questions at all during our time, just put a Q before at the beginning of your question so that it will draw our attention to it. And then GP will probably remind you of this at the beginning of the moderation as well. Additionally, for those of you who are new to the group or me, my name is Chynna Phillips, and I am the Senior Director of Policy and Research at the Sisters of Charity Foundation. And I also have the absolute joy of serving as your newly elected chair of the Advocacy Allies Peer Network. This network facilitates peer-to-peer engagement and amplification of voices to harness our collective power of Together SC's membership organizations. So who are advancing greater good. So outside of those tenets that I just mentioned, my hopes during my tenure are twofold. One, I hope that it continues to send a message to my fellow funders that supporting movements led by trusted community members and nonprofit partners helps to increase our overall impact and advance not only our mission, but ensure that South Carolina is a state where all members of our community can thrive. In addition to that, I also hope that it continues to drive home to our nonprofit colleagues that it's okay to do work in this space and it is needed. So let me share. Now more than ever, I have experienced my philanthropic peers meeting and discussing and dreaming together of ways to aid our nonprofit partners in our mission by utilizing our collective voice, by building power sharing strategies. I see some of my colleagues here, and so hi everyone, and thank you. Alice Walker reminds us that the most common way people give up their power is by thinking that they don't have any. I will forever be grateful for Jamie Moon and Madeline McGee for proposing this idea 3 years ago to bring us all together. It is a step in the right direction that promotes social movement culture that is collaborative, broadly focused, fluid, and rooted in community and the needs stemming from them. With this in mind, I would be remiss if I didn't acknowledge the leaders who are assembled to move these tenets forward in our purpose. So of course, Madeline McGee, our fearless leader of Together SC. Again, Jamie Moon, president of the Institute for Child Success, an immediate past chair. Sally Ehrenfried at Blackbaud, Nancy Lee, Habitat for Humanity of South Carolina. Naomi Lett, United Way of the Association of South Carolina, Michelle Knapp with the ACLU, Bernie Mazik with SCASID, Chris Deed at the Fullerton Foundation, John Tynan with Conservation Voters of South Carolina, Ann Warner with Women's Rights and Empowerment Network. And I also would like to publicly welcome Sara E. Melendez, the new public policy director at the Hispanic Alliance, and our very own Emily O'Brien, director of advocacy at the United Way of the Piedmont. If you're here, I can't see you right now because I can only see my face, but I'm saying hello, I'm giving you hugs, and I'm so happy. And this work would not be able to move forward as efficiently without the support of our great GP McLeer, our peer network lead. By both mission and personal conviction, these leaders have been committed to advancing their organizational work through advocacy and will continue to share their expertise to shape our collective understanding to build trust and momentum, y'all. Momentum being the key word. We're going to keep this moving forward. So please stay tuned for a robust calendar with a mix of shared learning opportunities and times to fellowship as we continue our collective voice. So now, are we okay to get into our content for today? Seeing thumbs up from Madeline, so all right. How are we doing, Louise? I'll go forward with some introductions. So Mr. Reyes, on the call today, you have a broad group of leaders. Over 75 leaders from across the state actually registered for this event with a wide range of issues from food justice to child well-being, affordable housing, and the list continues. I would encourage you to review the list of attendees and continue to use Together SC and the nonprofit sector as a resource for examples of both lived experiences and expertise that can shape and inform your policies. Colleagues, our speaker today is Mr. Luis Reyes, the Deputy Legislative Assistant for Senator Tim Scott. He works on small business issues for Senator Scott and has been working in the office since 2020. He received his master's degree from George Washington University, and I will remind you to please keep your lines muted, and is originally from Southern California, where he attended the University of the University of California, Irvine for his bachelor's and began his career working for Congressman Mimi Waters. Our moderator today needs no introduction, but for those of you who may be new to us, GP McLeer is the mayor of Fountain Inn, South Carolina, the executive director of Upstate Mobility Alliance, and a founding partner of Pecan Public Relations, and our peer network lead. He is a husband, amazing father to a beautiful little girl, and because of this group, I can now say a dear friend. So I'll hand it over to you, gentlemen. Take it away.
Thanks, Chynna, and hello, Louise. Thank you for being here today. I believe for those on the call, 2 quick reminders: make sure your microphone's muted, and please use the chat for your questions. And start it with the letter Q, and then I will sort of help stack those as we go along, and we'll let. I know Luis has a lot he would like to cover with you today about the federal landscape as it is right now, and some of the nonprofit specific issues that the senator's office has monitored and kept up with and is working on, and then also some general things about the priorities in DC right now. And then towards the end, we will open up for questions. Depending on the number of questions, I will either kind of offer them up to Luis, or we will ask you, if you're still on the call, to ask them yourself, so get some faces with some names. But Luis, I'm going to turn over to you, and I know you've got some stuff that you wanted to cover first, and then we'll get going.
Thanks, GP, sorry, and everybody on the call for joining today. And I apologize if there's some background noise, but there was a kind of an impromptu drill that was scheduled on us here, so you might hear some noises and some talking in the background. But yeah, glad to be here. I actually had the privilege of being down in South Carolina, I want to say about this time last month. So it was great. There was a lot of rain while I was driving down Sumter, so that was a fun time. But anyway, getting to kind of the work that Senator Scott and the team here are focused on, one big thing that we saw coming out of the pandemic was the need to address employee retention issues, and I think that was a big component of some of the pandemic relief discussions. So one thing that Senator Scott has spearheaded is the Employee Retention Tax Credit Reinstatement Act. I think Senator Scott saw the value of doing of supporting ERTC, and having listened to various stakeholders around the country in South Carolina, given his position on the Finance Committee, he felt it necessary to reinstate this vital tax credit. Along with that, Senator Scott's also a champion of a lot of other issues, including charitable deduction contributions, that he's leading on that legislation. And he also has a bipartisan bill on the Adoption Tax Credit Refundability Act. These are just some of the legislative items, at least, that the senator is working on. And most of these are pretty self-explanatory. But overall, I think what we've been tracking on has just been the drastic impacts of labor shortages, of inflation. Of course, that's been a top of mind for Senator Scott and our team, and also any of the heavy burden regulations that folks are feeling, some of the complexities in the tax code. All those things are what our team and Senator Scott is working to try to find some kind of bipartisan solutions, because one thing that's really important to stress, and one thing that you'll notice that's very common in a lot of these legislative packages is they're bipartisan. And the reason for that is because we can't do this alone, right? The Senate requires 60 votes for anything. We have to find the kind of consensus. And one thing I like to remind a lot of folks is if something doesn't happen this Congress, usually these items get picked up, the next year and the next year, or we need folks like you to remind us to do it the next year, kind of keep things moving along. So we're making sure that we're addressing these issues and hopefully getting them included into some kind of, a tax extenders package, or if they can get passed on standalone items, that's usually our goal. But those are a couple of the issues that we're mostly tracking on. Kind of from a broader congressional standpoint, I know that there's been a lot of buzz in the news just this past, I want to say 48 hours on what's been going on. I know that the state of South Carolina really cares about manufacturing and a lot of those issues. So we had a vote on the semiconductor bill, which is then followed by the news of a reconciliation package. So I think that reconciliation package is going to take a lot of our time in the short term, either prior to the August recess or even bleeding into a little bit during or prior or after the August recess. So that, those things are going to be probably one of those kind of shortcomings is going to be, we don't, another example of when things aren't bipartisan, you are going to see some kind of a response to that. And I can tell you, Senator Scott's already worried about some of the things we're seeing in the text of that legislation. Along with that, we're keeping track of a lot of other issues that are impacting nonprofits, small businesses, and also just trying to see how we're having these discussions. I think what we're being mindful of is the kind of the overwhelming consensus among some folks is that we need to, look to the federal government to be the solution to all of our problems. Now, why that might be true, and there might be a lot of good legislative fixes that we can do, I think what's also important is to raise up the work that you guys are doing, and find ways in which we can partner, both down at the state, but also here, instead of only thinking that, everything's going to come from Congress, wheeling and dealing legislation. So I think that's been a big point that we've been kind of driving home to, is just taking our time, making sure we're doing this right, we're doing this properly, and that we're doing it bipartisan. So we're at least making sure that a lot of folks are being part of that discussion. So if, these are kind of the main items. I know that another discussion topic has been opportunity zones. Opportunity zones, I think, is a big part of the senator's agenda. In 2017, it was part of the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So this year, it was reintroduced along with Senator Booker leading the legislation this time, given that the Democrats are in the majority in the Senate. But it's very bipartisan. We saw a lot of great results. The economic impacts in 2019, which was the last year of the 5-year kind of timeline that was established into the legislation, saw really great returns. And we're hoping to see that, the opportunity zones can continue to build private or bring private capital into a lot of distressed communities. And we are very much hoping that this gets included into a tax extenders item towards the end of the year. And we hope that, seeing that the impact isn't felt just in areas that are more conservative or more liberal, but throughout the country, should be something that kind of helps move this across the finish line. One big thing that Senator Scott really cares about when it comes to opportunity zones is the reporting requirements under that. Because I'm sure many critics will say, well, opportunity zones it's just creating gentrification. And while we have our disagreements that's the case, we would like to actually see the actual results of the program. And that's kind of what we're hoping to get out of this legislation, is those reporting requirements that were unfortunately stripped out when we did the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act. So all that being said, I'm happy to open open this up to questions. I think this is mostly what I had to share for today.
Thanks, Luis. Yeah, I've got a couple to kind of get us started, and folks, feel free to put them in the chat, or some of you have messaged them to me too. That's fine. Whatever you see fit. This one will lead into a couple of that I've already gotten. There's a lot. You mentioned, the CHIPS bill, which is out of the Senate. You've mentioned the reconciliation package is coming in hot and heavy right now on everyone's plate. You've mentioned, it's also an August recess, and then the midterms are November. There's a lot of oxygen being taken up by those kind of compounding issues. When we talk about things that are important to our sector and many other sectors, how much, can you talk a little bit about how much, give us kind of an on the ground perspective on how much oxygen is being taken up for some of these other issues that are very important, especially to our sector, but understanding the landscape of these big priorities that are in front of you.
Yeah, so that's a really great question, because I think it's always important to kind of articulate this point. Reconciliation, because it handles a lot of items related to the budget. It also means it handles a lot of items related to revenue. And a lot of these issues that touch nonprofits have a bit of a tax component to them. So that being the case, I can tell you that committees right now are, especially the finance committee that handles this space, is very dedicated at trying to figure out what's going to happen with reconciliation. How is this going to play out? And of course, there's a number of disagreements on our side of the aisle that are, that side of the committee is focused on, while there's a lot of things that the other side of the aisle probably wants to see happen. So they're focused on that. It's something that once this gets done, I think there'll definitely be much more time to work on, but I can tell you it's probably taking up all the oxygen in the room right now, which, one can say, all right, well, it's important to address the issues. And I totally understand that. But on the other side, you're not allowing all these other bipartisan things that should get done to actually get done. So it's a matter of priorities. And of course, this is part of having majorities, right? The majority is going to set their agenda, and that's what they've done. But from Senator Scott's point of view, I think that we should have been moving on these bipartisan things a long time ago. And we're hoping that if there is a tax extenders package towards the end of the year, some of these things will be included, which, in that case is going to be a little bit of a scramble towards the end of the year. It could even be done post November election. But, definitely these things will have to get addressed, or else, we have to start the process all over again come January.
Yeah, which I guess leads into, and David, if you'd like, so David Thompson's on the call from the National Council of Nonprofits, our national network, and he has a great question, very much related to the issues surrounding that you mentioned. David, if you'd like, I'll give you a second if you want to ask your question that you sent me.
Oh, so many, but Luis, thank you. Wonderful presentation, and you've nailed in your opening comments. You nailed the key issues that folks in Washington the charitable nonprofit community is worried about. And just for the record, I'm David Thompson with the National Council of Nonprofits. This is a South Carolina accent. I'm from Greenville. So just
David, I think we met before. Have you come to my office? Yep,
yes,
we met.
have.
Yeah.
Right. But wanted everyone else to know I'm not a Washington slick. I'm a South Carolinian and pronounce that correctly. So at least GP cares where I'm from, if not some of the Charleston folks. Yes, there is state rivalry. Senator Scott is a huge champion of the top two priorities, the Universal Charitable Deduction and the restoration of the Employee Retention Tax Credit. Any chance those can be broken out? I want to come back to the charitable giving, but what advice do you have to the folks on the calls for pushing that for those two priorities forward?
Yeah, I mean, I would say trying to engage with Congress as much as possible is definitely helpful. I know that I think ERTC is overwhelmingly popular. So I know that, folks on the other side of the aisle like it, but there are, to my understanding, there were some concerns with the way the legislation was, some of the pieces of the legislation. So it's a matter of engaging the folks that, it's a little tricky because, of course, in South Carolina, it's overwhelmingly a Republican delegation. But of course, engaging the folks that you can that are not in the Republican delegation, and trying to say, hey, we really want to see this through. We would like for you to engage more with the current members that are leading the cause, because I think that's just a big thing, because we don't hold the pen. We don't have the gavel, as we like to say. So that means that a lot of the agenda is not set by us. But that being said, the senator that's actually leading the legislation is a Democrat. So that's and the senator is a co-leader on that legislation. So it's about not just engaging us, your legislators, but hopefully finding a way through your networks to also engage the other relevant senators and stakeholders that would care about moving this forward.
Thanks.
Thank you. Something that Madeline, I'll let you chime in with your first question about ARPA, but wanted to kind of get some context for everyone on the call too. So ARPA funding has been sort of a big priority for Together SC and for a lot of nonprofit associations across the country, as nonprofits are extremely eligible for those fundings and do a lot of things in communities that would benefit from being supported. South Carolina has not invested all of its funding, so we're always learning from other states. Madeline, do you want to ask your question about that?
Oh, thank you. Sorry about that. Yes, putting on your, looking back at the state capitol and saying, okay, we work closely with the state legislators, Senator Scott's staff does. Any thoughts on how we can help our state legislators understand the opportunities for using ARPA funds to invest in the work of nonprofits? So much of the work that we do that the government doesn't need to be doing in terms of servicing the needs of our constituents.
Yeah, it's tricky because once the money leaves the federal hands, it gets into the state hands, so that becomes a question of how the state decides to use those. I know that when I think this is back in October of last year, I remember being down in the state and having conversations with, this is when I was under a different portfolio, but there was discussions about infrastructure and how some of the ARPA funds were to be used for that. So I would say continuing to engage with the relevant stakeholders, the folks that could actually push this through, depending on what you guys are looking to, how you're looking to get the money distributed, I think is the best thing. I think it becomes a tough case for us because we can't, being at the federal level, can't be prescriptive.
But you can be encouraging.
Right. But it's about like saying, hey, can you please do this? And it's,
yeah,
right.
Well, I'd say to remind them it's part of the intent.
Yeah. And it just boils down to, having those discussions with them and trying to figure out what their priorities are too. I mean, it's like engaging with us at the federal level, but instead you're engaging with them. So I think it's the same kind of outreach, but it just doesn't really fall too much in our sphere to be a little too pushing with them. And ultimately it's about also maybe engaging with governor's office and with the legislators as well.
Sort of on a related note, many thanks for all the money that the federal government is investing in broadband access. This is such an issue for our state. There are so many dark spots in rural communities where without adequate broadband, there's not economic opportunity. And we really have a strong program happening at the state level to increase the access and availability. What we're not seeing yet is the money to help with adoption. So we've got the money to help put the infrastructure down the road, but not to help that grandmother learn how to use an iPad to teach her grandson. Do you see opportunities for funding of adoption work and excuse me. Do you see opportunities for any funding for the adoption work?
I think right now, that's a big discussion topic because I can tell you there's been, with a lot of the recent things that you've probably seen on the news, I think Senator Scott, for example, is interested in thinking of how we both legislate and talk about pro-family policy. And we see adoption in that sphere. So in terms of there being opportunity, yes. What that looks like, I think, is how we're quite kind of trying to figure that out. In terms of direct funding, I don't currently see a road for that at the moment, but I can tell you that Senator Scott, being one of the sponsors of the Adoption Tax Credit Refundability Act, at least we're using these kind of opportunities, which, we always see the tax code as an opportunity to try to move some of our priorities through. And this is one of those opportunities that we see. But yeah, in terms of direct funding, I'm happy to continue to be part of that discussion with the folks on this call and field any of those ideas. But anything like that directly is just a question of how a lot of these things play out too on reconciliation. I think the other thing we have to be mindful of, and we understand the ROI and what that means, but also the amount of spending that Congress has given in the last couple of years has been very, very overwhelming. So, and looking at the economists and kind of the analysis there, we want to be mindful of what that's done to inflationary pressures. So I think that's the other thing that we're trying to keep in mind, and we're kind of juggling that concern at the moment.
For those on the call, I'm just letting you know what I'm going to try to do with our questions over this is sort of try to tier them a little bit with some kind of sector-wide broad stroke questions, and then getting a little bit more narrow. So if you've got specific questions related to your mission work, please feel free to put them in, and we're gonna try to get to as many as we can too. But just in case, don't feel like if I'm jumping your question, I haven't forgot about it. I'm going to try to get a little bit big picture stuff and then work our way down a little bit, Louise, if that's okay with you too. And then also put them in the chat, because what we can do is send these questions to Louise too as well, and make sure that if there are some other guidance on it, that we can kind of get that to those on the call and a wrap up afterwards. So just wanted to put that out there. This points to one of the questions I got in the chat a little bit. David, I think it was one of yours. See if I can, I'm going to kind of tweak it a little bit here. One of the wins that we saw in ARPA language, and this isn't really an ARPA question, but one of the wins for the nonprofit sector we saw was change in the final rule to make sure that nonprofits were grouped with small businesses. Because since you work on the small business issues in Senator Scott's office, I wanted to kind of talk about, get your feedback on either times you think it's appropriate that we kind of branch out, the ERTC being one, and some of the uniqueness in the workforce issues that we have, or the charitable tax deduction, but also where it's beneficial, because nonprofits are businesses too. It's just a matter of what happens with the profits we make. And so that is, can you talk a little bit from your perspective, working on small business issues, of how nonprofits can strengthen our message in your sphere?
I think, yeah, continuing to kind of advocate on it, I think, is important. I think during the pandemic, we engaged quite a bit with some of the nonprofits, especially, yeah, because 2020 was a really tough year. And seeing that there was a lot of work that the nonprofit space was doing, and not getting the kind of response or relief, I think, is important, and highlighting that kind of these kind of efforts. But of course, the one thing we always are cognizant of is, like you mentioned, it's the profit sharing, or the profit issue. And just know that I would always encourage everyone to advocate on their issues, but that we will always just kind of keep these things in mind, because we, being in the Senate, we do want to try to legislate carefully and make this happen, in a responsible manner. And the way I say this is, look, the House of Representatives, I love the House, but they're trying to kind of bring home the bacon, so to say. And what we're trying to do here is we're trying to process this and try to make it as fleshed out as possible. So we're taking all these different factors into consideration, and that's probably one of those, as you mentioned. Does that mean that we don't see you guys as a business? No, we definitely do. I mean, you hire a lot of employees, you creates jobs, and it also does very important work in communities. that Senator Scott truly values, and that a lot of us here value. So just continue to reach out. It's not, hopefully that's not discouraging, but just to let you know, that's the one thing that a lot of us just have to factor in before we make any kind of considerations or adopt ideas.
Madeline or David, did you have anything on that? Because I know that was a big win for us in the ARPA final rule. Did you have any additions on that thought before I kind of move on a little bit?
Only that on the American Rescue Plan Act, nonprofits are eligible, but are not entitled. And everything Luis said, let me add an exponent to it, that we have to actually do something about it. And Together SC is in a great position to help you advocate, to help you coordinate and target the messages to address longstanding challenges. Senator Scott's targeted a number of very important areas that need help. You know, always take his lead, but in the local level, the towns and so forth, Fountain Inn or wherever, is the opportunity to focus on local problems, sitting together with your funders, your networks of funders that Chynna works with, to ensure that the real problems are being solved, and through genuine partnership, we're able to accomplish good things.
Thank you. Getting to a little bit more some specific stuff, but not too specific yet. I'm going to go to Chynna's question about the opportunity zones and the measurements that you're seeing. Chynna, do you want to chime in with that question?
Yeah, I just wanted to say thank you for mentioning the critique from many community members about who's being left out. Often for our Opportunity Zone, our foundation is focused on poverty. So it's important for me to lift up that piece. So how can we ensure that that doesn't continue? And you mentioned that there are some provisions that you are potentially proposing. Can you speak more to that? Because you kind of went over that pretty quickly. Thank you.
Yeah, so in 2017, we did the Tax Cuts and Jobs Act, and when we did opportunity zones, I think usually when we do a lot of when we stand up some programs, Congress wants to be cognizant that that the work being done is actually being done and is being done the way we intend to. So usually we add some kind of reporting requirement. I think if I remember correctly, and maybe someone even on this call could tell me if I'm saying this wrong, there was procedurally, there was an issue that came up with that reporting requirement. So that was unfortunately stripped out of the legislation of the overall Tax Cuts and Jobs Act package. So when the legislation was actually passed, the only thing we got was the opportunity zones component without the reporting requirement. Senator Scott since then has been trying through different legislation to try to pass that back and, you know, to put that into law, but unfortunately gotten a little bit into the partisan weeds, so it didn't get the kind of progress we were hoping for. To address your point regarding, you know, marginalized communities in a lot of these areas, one thing to keep in mind is opportunity zones is something where folks like, you know, development companies and a lot of these investors can come in and see the benefits of eventually selling off, you know, the properties and developments that they do, and even in their investments in areas of these identified areas of opportunity zones, and keep some of the benefits, which is kind of reduced capital gains tax. So I think one thing to keep in mind is it definitely is something for folks with a little bit more, how would I say this, a little bit more money to move things around. But I think the ultimate good that it does is that some areas that haven't seen infusion of capital in years are starting to see those infusions of capital. And you know, that this is why it's important to keep this kind of program going, because we want to see the areas in which we can make those investments in now, and where they're actually investments that are starting up. And then we want to build off from that. So I think that's something that it's going to take a lot of discussions, and it's going to take a lot of time, but that's why I mentioned that the reporting requirements on, you know, where's the biggest impact, you know, what are the communities that are seeing the most progress from opportunity zones, and, you know, what are some ways that we can address some of the problems, has to be part of that conversation in order to make the program better. Because I can tell you that this opportunity zones is not a Republican issue. I can tell you here in DC, Mayor Bowser really benefits from opportunity zones, and the DC government website even promotes the use of them. So it's something that has a profound opportunity for a lot of folks throughout the country. And I'm being me from Southern California, I can tell you there's probably a lot of cities that benefit from this program as well.
Yeah, thank you so much, Louise. I know our colleagues down in the Low Country Coastal Community Foundation really champions a lot of the work that you've done. And then I'd love to remain in relationship with you so we can continue on just to talk about like who is getting incentivized to kind of be in those spaces, minority owned kind of corporations, and making sure that there's like mixed method understanding of income and all of that when they do bring housing to those zones. So, but GP, I'll kick it back to you. Thank you, Louise.
Yeah. There's a couple good specific questions. There's one that's a little broad that I want to hit first and then turn it over. So Lauren, I'm going to come to you in a second about your question about the impact of recession fears and supporting small businesses and nonprofits in that regard. And then just FYI, Andrew, I know you had one of the first questions that I'm coming towards you. So Lauren, if you'd like, if you want to chime in with your question, or I'm happy to if you'd rather me read it for you. Oh, not camera ready. Sorry, I'll take it for you, Lauren. Lauren wrote in the chat, Louise, small businesses are critical supporters of the nonprofit sector, and they are facing their own hardships from COVID and supply chain and everything going on. With recession fears on the rise, how is Senator Scott working to provide ongoing support? I'm going to add nonprofits and small businesses beyond the ERTC. She wrote about specific provisions to support MBE entrepreneurs. So can you talk about sort of with the economic data coming out in the senator's position on what that economic data may mean for the country, what might be some of the tactile things going forward that we see to support the small business community, including nonprofits across the country?
You know, that is a very good question, and it is it's probably one of the more challenging questions, because I think a lot of us are, I think one thing, and I hope this doesn't sound very doom and gloom, but we don't, one of our concerns is, you know, with the impact of raising interest rates, there's going to be a lot of questions about capital being shored up. So where can Congress act in this case, given that we also don't want to be expending more, appropriating more, and creating greater inflationary pressures? So I think one thing that Senator Scott wants to make sure that we're doing is providing forms of access to capital for a lot of small businesses, and finding ways that we can make it both attainable and reachable for everyday people, but especially small business folks that need that kind of capital to start their businesses. So one way that we've done that is through the banking side. Senator Scott has promoted the Credit Access and Inclusion Act. He's reintroduced this bill a couple times, which would help folks build their credit worthiness just by simply by simply paying off their usual debts, at least as a way to get, you know, early small business owners started in trying to raise some of their capital. In terms of workforce shortages, of course, we are very concerned about what that's doing. In my recent trips to the state, I feel like I've encountered a lot of conversations about how people are being impacted by that. So Senator Scott, being on the Finance Committee, works a lot on retirement issues. So we're trying to find, you know, we're trying to continue the work that was done in what was known as the Secure Act. Now we did Secure 2.0, which is just a broad range of different legislative items to address retirement. And that boils down to how small businesses can plan for retirement, both for themselves, for the owners, and for their employees. So that's part of that conversation. The other thing that a lot of people are having conversations about, and I've actually engaged with the Goldman Sachs folks who are leading the 10,000 small businesses push, is ways in which we can work towards childcare, respond to childcare needs through small businesses, and finding ways in which, you know, And this is all kind of preliminary. It's not something that we put pen to paper, but at least have been talking about, is maybe seeing ways that we can maybe pool those resources or find ways that small businesses can work together in communities. How that looks like, of course, that's the thing that needs to probably get fleshed out. But I hope that answers some of your questions. I know I can tell you there's a lot of uncertainties, and the last thing I want to do is be doom and gloom about this, but of course be very proactive in working with y'all and other folks up here in DC, of course, because a lot of stakeholders are represented here.
Thanks, Louise. Yeah, I know there's, as Chynna just wrote in the chat, there's the child care issue is one I know a lot of us in the nonprofit field are working on, and it's a big piece of I think some of our ARPA direction that's been going on. And so anyway, there's a lot of movement on that, and I know involving the nonprofit sector in those conversations would I think strengthen that to a lot as well. I'm going to turn it over to Andrew. I did one of the first questions. Sorry, Andrew, for taking so long. I wanted to get the broad strokes as best I could there. Andrew, do you want to summarize some of your questions as best you can, and see what Louise has for you?
Yeah, sure. Thank you. And thank you, Louise, for meeting with us today. To introduce myself, I'm Andrew Wylam. I'm the president of Pandemic Patients, and we're a nonprofit that does advocacy work for COVID-19 and long COVID patients. We've had a lot of challenges getting funding from state or federal sources to support our work. And so, we talked a little bit about that ARPA money and how that can go through the state and how that's kind of pending. But Senator Kaine has introduced the Care for Long COVID Act, and that would allocate money between FY23 and FY27 to support organizations like ours and the work that we do to support patients and advance public health. So I'm asking if you can please request from the senator that he co-sponsor that legislation. That funding is sorely needed. And there's enormous need for the work that we're doing, and we're doing it on a shoestring budget, and we really need the support from the government for this. Second is we've been pushing for the Help Committee to have a hearing on long COVID, which Senator Scott sits on. So can you please request from him that he ask the ranking member, Senator Burr, can he just lend his support to this idea that there needs to be a hearing on long COVID where patients and advocates and clinicians can, talk about this issue and how important it is and the burden that it's placing on individuals and their families.
Thanks, Andrew. I'll preface this by saying some of this kind of falls under our healthcare team's bucket, so that's a little outside of my portfolio piece. But I can tell you that, of course, the pandemic really stressed the need to have a lot of extended conversations about different problems that are still ongoing. And I think I'm happy to have that conversation with our healthcare team about what's going on. With regards to the legislation you mentioned, is that one going through also the Help Committee, or which one is that? Where is that going?
I believe that's Help as well, yes.
Okay. Yeah. So thanks for flagging, and I'll write that down.
Thank you so much.
Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you, Andrew, and thank you, Louise. And for everyone else on the call, be sure, if you've got more questions around that, around your mission-specific issues, please feel free to in the chat. And I know if Louise can't answer it on his behalf, he can help us get that answer, a status update or something like that. And Louise, I guess, is it okay if we share your email in the chat for folks in case they'd rather send it that way? And you can, like you said, you've got different groups of your staff. Is that all right? I assume yes, because
yes.
Your email card.
Yeah.
All right. Sorry, I'm scrolling back up. Get through some of these questions. Thank you, Andrew, for those great questions as well. Phil Ford, if you'd like to chime in with your questions and kind of sum them up for Louise, and if you're still on.
Yeah, I'm happy to. Thank you so much for joining us, Louise. My name's Phil. I represent a couple of groups on the call today, Wholespire and South Carolina United for Justice and Equality. Just a couple of questions. Since the beginning of the pandemic, school meals were provided for free for families regardless of income. And we know that was helping communities, especially during the pandemic. But in South Carolina, we have a higher rate of child food insecurity than many other states around the country. I was wondering, with inflation still high and families still struggling because of the pandemic, if Senator Scott would be willing to be a champion and lead on a bill to establish universal school meals for all children, regardless of income.
Yeah, I'll be honest with you, that's another one of those that I might have to punt off to someone else, only because I think this falls under our agriculture and education portfolios, which are two that I don't cover, but I'm happy to, again, have my email provided in the box and see how, if there's any information we can get to you on that. I wish I had a little bit more context about what's going on. I know that you mentioned the pandemic. Yeah, that was a big one that I do remember hearing about. But I wish I could speak more to it. So I don't want to give you the inaccurate information there.
No, I understand. I'll definitely follow up. And then my follow-up question is unrelated to that, but you talked about supporting families with tax credits and different things. And there's a myriad of data that shows families with married parents reduces the incidence of child poverty. Can you share with us, now that the House has passed the Respect for Marriage Act, the senator's position?
So, well, what I'll say right now is, we're still having those conversations about where we're going to land there. And that's to say, we're cognizant of the legislation in terms of, what it's trying to do. And I'll have a candid conversation here with you guys, because I know that's what you guys would like to hear. We're concerned that this is all part of kind of a political issue. This issue's been resolved for the most part by the Supreme Court under Obergefell. And we're not trying to challenge Obergefell. I mean, I don't see the senator coming out and being very vocal to challenge Obergefell. That being said, we're still trying to figure out where we're landing on that. So it's one of those things that unfortunately I can't really share too much on that at the moment. But we do want to acknowledge that from our side, we're a little disappointed that that's what's being done in this circumstance, because no one's really trying to ruin what's already been established now since 2014. So I think that's just kind of the way that we're first of all kind of looking at it from that lens, but definitely understand that, and this is the way I've had the conversations with other folks in this office, is marriage is very much an economic issue as well. It's kind of like an institution coming together of two people. So knowing that would be the consequence of breaking all those unions apart, I think that definitely does not make us wanting to chase for overruling that precedent. And I think a lot of this conversation came up because of a concurring opinion from a particular justice. And I just, it's telling that it's just him, right? Like it wasn't like everybody else jumped onto that. So I understand the need to legislate on this item. Congress does have that responsibility, but I feel like it's going after something that was already resolved for the most part.
No, I appreciate that, Luis. As a gay South Carolinian, I hope that it would be legislated and that we can have the senator's support. Thank you.
Thank you, Phil. I think what does bring up a good point is some of these legislative issues that are in front of Congress now, and I think it's important for nonprofits to we try to do our advocacy work across the spectrum and making sure that when legislation is proposed, like Phil said, there are ramifications that related to our mission work, and I think it's important for elected officials to understand policy changes that may impact the delivery of mission of our mission and our services. So I think it's definitely important for us to know, and for us to let Louise know here's how a particular piece of legislation may impact our work, and that may help at least have all the information in front as we move forward. Megan, I think you have your next up, if you're still on the call, if you'd like to chime in with your question.
I am. Hey, good morning, GP and Louis. Thank you so much for being on. This is a question from my health team to the senator's health team. Again, kind of the conversations related earlier around COVID and public health. I'm speaking on behalf of South Carolina's children who have special health care needs and disabilities. That number is growing increasingly high in our state, and we are concerned about if and when the public health emergency does end, the number of kids that may come off Medicaid or lose their coverage. And we are anticipating, several thousand children and families potentially either losing services or having a gap in services, which can be detrimental to their long-term health. So we would welcome any guidance or suggestions that the senator's office has about ways to address that at the federal level. Certainly having those conversations with our state Medicaid office and partners here, but appreciate any guidance or again, suggestions from his healthcare team just to help us make sure that this doesn't happen for our families. Thank you.
So sorry, let me see if I understand the question. So you're trying to figure out, ways in which, a lot of the healthcare issues that are being kind of handled by the state, what is the best ways to go about advocating for some of these at the state level? Sorry if I didn't quite
That's
understand.
Okay. That's okay. So I appreciate the asking the clarifying piece because it is confusing. We are doing work at the state level. I think what would help us the most is just to be aware of the conversations and the discussion at the federal level so that we know kind of what to anticipate and plan for, and we can work with our colleagues and partners here to be ready for the unraveling or potentially children losing those services. So anything that you can share with us about those conversations that are happening at the national level so that we can kind of coordinate at the state level would be very helpful.
Now, is this, with regards to children, are you referring to conversations around childcare?
So mainly children who have healthcare coverage. So we're really talking about children who have special healthcare needs, children who have disabilities, may be receiving Medicaid, special healthcare waivers so they can access services in the community and in their home. And with the public health emergency, certainly making sure those families don't come off during that time. We appreciate that sort of those parameters have been in place, but we know that that will come to an end at some point, and some families may come off, and we don't want those families to lose those services or have any sort of gap that would negatively impact their child's health.
Yeah, I think to this one falls more on our healthcare team. So I think to best kind of address those issues, I think what would be great is for and with my email in the box, please feel free to connect with me, and I'm happy to connect you with our healthcare team to kind of answer a little bit more of that, just because it's what I don't have too much nuance on more of the healthcare side of things, and I apologize for that.
Thank you, Lewis. I'll follow up with you via email. I appreciate it.
Yep, you got it.
Megan, we had the public service loan forgiveness program. I know it expired in I don't know, there doesn't seem to be much movement on restoring that yet. But has the senator, or I guess the nature of Congress in this moment, given thought to some of the workforce needs that are out there, and some of these elements that have helped sustain workforces, especially in the mission-driven areas that nonprofits work in? Can you talk a little bit, I guess, more broadly, to give you a little bit more wider platform to speak on workforce shortage efforts? And do you have any insights into some things that might benefit our workforce that's more mission-driven on the ground?
Regarding the public service loan forgiveness program, since I think that's more of a education question, I'll definitely be probably looping y'all in with our education folks on that one. But with regards to kind of broader kind of workforce challenges. I think what we want to do is, aside from ERTC, as was mentioned, is trying to prepare the workforce to kind of get ready to jump in, as they're leaving school, as they're trying to plan for their futures. So I think that raises a good question about what the future of doing so looks like, because we're having conversations a lot about apprenticeships, about things like WIOA, which is a big federal program to kind of help bridge some of the skill gap issues. But how does that look like? And I think a lot of it is having, kind of from what the senator's standpoint is some of that's legislating, but some of that's also just engagement in general, and engaging with the various colleges and universities is something that he's been doing most recently now, but has been talking about for many years. And some of the ways we do that is we engage with different universities, and more specifically with something that the senator really cares about is HBCUs. So engaging with a lot of our historically Black colleges and universities is one way we're trying to open up diversity, open up the opportunities that they can see, that a lot of African-American students, but more diverse crowds can see, that, these jobs are out there, they're tenable, we want to get involved with them. So there's been a lot of conversations around that, but also just generally kind of how we can bridge things through apprenticeships, through kind of learning a little bit more about the jobs themselves. So I don't know if that helps answer some of that.
Great. Sorry, I'm kind of flipping through trying to find the questions. Here we go. I had one here. Sorry, Luis. I'm kind of trying to, my screen is. What is, so this is a little bit of a totally different question that I've got for you, and it's a kind of a you question, Luis. All of us on this call obviously have an interest in public policy and the impacts it has and keeping up with what's going on. This is one of my favorite questions to ask people in general in this line of work. Can you talk about any sort of policy tools or things like, for instance, your morning newsletter rundown? What are some policy tools that you guys kind of tap into in your office level that maybe, back home we can also tap into to kind of have a good pulse reading on things?
Kind of a lot of the DC papers, so like Politico, Morning Consult. Is that kind of the question? Just some of those.
And
Yeah.
like any sort of unique things that you guys sort of,
Yeah.
maybe inside the DC bubble that we don't really think about down here because we got other things going on.
So in terms of the Hill, yeah, those are two that I would really recommend. There's another newspaper called Roll Call. And all these guys, they primarily focus on the day-to-day here. So what's going on, what's going on in committee, what's the buzz in committee. Sometimes they might jump into a little bit of the campaign gossip, but a lot of the times they do carry on politics or policy. The Hill is another good paper, but that's in terms of like more of a public forum. Another thing that's widely available to the public that Congress actually utilizes quite a bit is the Congressional Research Service, where you can find kind of primers and information about ongoing pieces of legislation and legislative discussion. So you'll kind of get like a background of an issue, and then wherever they can plug and play certain bills that senators or Congress members have introduced, they'll do so and kind of explain what they do, how they're addressing the problem, what are some advantages, but some disadvantages. So I think those are really good, helpful tools. And another thing is just engaging with like with a lot of the associations and trades that represent a lot of the nonprofits and small businesses up here. They're always putting out press releases, summaries, one-pagers, or even legislative priority lists that kind of explain what they're looking for. So I think all those things is something that I use that are always publicly available to everybody else. I think those are the best ways you can engage.
Thanks, Liz. That's just sorry, that seemed a little bit out of the line that we were in. That's always a fun one for me to kind of
Yeah.
hear about. There's two, I see a third one. I want everyone to know Louise has to run about 11:15 for a hearing that got scheduled, or call that got scheduled yesterday. So we're going to try to get through this, but feel free to keep adding questions and we will send them along to Louise after the call too. One of them that I know is bubbling up a lot in South Carolina, and if it's okay with those who have asked it, I'll go ahead and take them just so we can make sure we get to them. Has been Medicaid expansion, and I'm curious about this, your offices. I know this is the healthcare team most likely, but talk about if there's any sort of context you can provide around that when it comes down for Medicaid expansion.
That's a little bit more of a healthcare team question. Or yeah, so I'm sorry. All I can tell you is I think that like we've been talking about a little bit, is the spending component is something we're being mindful of. And I know that that's a big part of that was a big part of the Affordable Care Act conversation that I remember, was that Medicaid expansion that happened back then. And then I'm assuming that there's further discussions about Medicaid expansion now. What that looks like, I'm unfortunately not too privy on that, well informed on it, but I can tell you that it's something that would, if I had to take kind of an educated guess, we'd probably just be a little bit mindful of ongoing economic trends that related to that, and some of the pressures we're seeing from entitlements that we know that are important but are also having a bit of a strain. So just kind of keeping that in mind.
Yeah, I also know that there's a state action as well around Medicaid expansion. It's not just a federal issue; it's definitely a state one, which I know everyone on this call knows too. But just stating it, and I'm aware that a lot of nonprofits are looking at that what the impact that could have on their work and the constituents they serve, and what that decision looks like on the ground. One of the kind of specific questions is related to veterans care and the burn pit legislation.
Mhm.
And I don't know if you were able to address that in some capacity.
Yeah. So I believe the Senate voted on that sometime last month. If you've noticed, and I know there's a lot of concerns about this right now. And this is one of those things that, I'll admit is very frustrating. And I can see where a lot of everyday people can be very frustrated. Not just everyday people, but even our stakeholders. But the procedures that are done here in the Senate are meant to also symbolize opportunities to voice disagreements. And one of those disagreements was, the procedural actions that were done the first go around when the Senate voted on the burn pits legislation on the floor. The senator wanted to voice that disagreement by a no vote. But if you see, the overall passage of that was he voted yes. When it went back to the House, there was a technicality that needed to get fixed. And as I'm sure a lot of y'all are aware, when you pass a bill in the Senate and you pass a bill in the House, they have to be exactly identical before they can go to the president's desk. So if you have to make those fixes, that means it has to go back to the other chamber because you have to vote on the same legislation. So that's what happened here. We still have disagreements on the procedural side. We feel like this bill did not have, while it's been talked about quite a bit, I feel like a lot of members did not have the opportunity to engage. That being said, though, we are weighing about where we stand on that overall on the legislation, but we are favorable of the bill. We do want to help veterans and especially folks with burn pits. I know that one of our staffers here had some of that exposures when he was serving the Marines. But we just have some questions on some of the procedural aspects of that. It's not objections to the legislation overall. And I think that's one thing that I hope helps kind of address some of those concerns, because I know that people are very disappointed in that vote, but it's not a vote to say we don't want to help veterans. It's a vote to say we want to do things properly here in the Senate.
Thank you, Louise. Another question that I think speaks to something that impacts a lot of us on the call is early on we talked about ARPA funding, and this isn't an ARPA question, but tracking what happens at the state level when it comes to federal dollars. Is that this is kind of a logistics question for the office. Is Nancy Lee at Habitat of Humanity of South Carolina? By the way, Nancy, I was at a legislative build earlier this morning. House looks great. Is there someone on staff at the senator's office who monitors how federal dollars and policies are implemented back in South Carolina? Is it spread across the portfolios of kind of the staff groups? Or how does that happen? And how can we maybe help your DC office be able to understand or better understand kind of what's happening on the ground?
I would say just letting us know, so let's say, I know the nonprofit sector gets impacted a lot by tax questions and a lot of those things. So first of all, letting us know how those impacts, maybe through tax credits and various things, is having something positive for you guys. I think that's important to engage and show both the numbers, show both the work that's being done. But then, if issues related to situations of small business or healthcare or any of those things come up, I think having just those discussions about specific legislative items that have come up, that have been passed and enacted, that are doing net positives and that are doing good. I think, Senator Scott really cares about the impacts here or in the state of South Carolina. And that helps us do our jobs, because it means that we can come back to him with whatever's going on and say, hey, this is something that people in the state are very mindful of. Like, just want to make sure that we're engaging with you, because that's a lot of what he cares about, is making sure that we're engaging with the people down in South Carolina as much as possible, helping him weigh in on how he does his job up here.
Thanks, Louise. Making sure. One of the questions was around, this is a little bit of a technical one for folks who maybe are newer to the DC sort of advocacy work, but caucuses. There are a lot of, I know the senator doesn't necessarily do caucuses, some do, some don't. Just for a learning lesson for us who do advocacy work, what is that decision, that position kind of, what is that rooted in, of either joining caucuses or not joining caucuses?
That one's a funny question, because I feel like it's kind of happened in different ways. Some of it's happened in, either someone even in South Carolina will say, hey, I heard that there's a caucus like this starting up. Is there a way you'd be interested in joining? Or we hear from stakeholders, or we find out about it ourselves. And that's kind of really where we're at on that. I think I'm trying to remember if he's on any of relevant caucuses here. I know he's part of an entrepreneurship caucus. I think he's on an adoption caucus, but then I'm not too sure which other ones that are kind of relevant in this field, but those are two that come top of mind. Like I mentioned to some of you folks, since I have two hats in my role, I do some of the national security stuff. So, and the senator's a big supporter of Israel. So he's on the Abraham Accords caucus, or we've pushed for him to get on that. So those are just some of the examples that we've we're thinking about, makes sense for him, some of his priorities. And that's another thing, is of course it has to be related to his priorities, like something he really cares about. And I think that goes for most senators.
Well, I got one last thing for you that is future facing. So what over these as soon as next week with reconciliation, as that was mentioned in the chat box, can you give sort of what the senator's view or his goals are in those conversations between reconciliation or things beyond that horizon over, between now and I guess the end of the year, but that's 6 months is a long time. It's also not a lot of time for y'all, but what are some of those big things? And I guess specifically starting with reconciliation, because that was asked in the chat.
Sure. I'll address reconciliation, but I'll say, what's remaining in the calendar seems to be both that, a possible tax extenders package, the National Defense Authorization Act, and then our appropriations bills to make sure we fund the government, which will probably, if I were to give you an estimate, would probably go into a CR, which is known as a continuing resolution, to keep the government funded as Congress continues to deliberate on how we look at appropriations. So that's just my educated guess on that. But to address reconciliation, I mean, I can tell you, Senator Scott is most likely going to be opposed to it, since it's something that, it's not being negotiated with us. It was done behind closed doors between Senator Manchin and Senator Schumer. And to be honest, it wasn't done in the most honest, transparent way possible. That being said, we always have a budget vote-a-rama. So we'll be engaging through that and seeing what the various amendments are that are introduced in that process. And just so for the folks in the call that don't know, when you go through reconciliation, you go through an amendment process where members are allowed to submit amendments that are voted on, and some that are germane are able to pass, germane to the budget are able to go through on a 51 vote basis. Those that are not germane would require 60 votes. A lot of this will be a lot of political messaging, but overall, just to get down to the point, I think we are concerned about raising taxes when we're seeing an economic downturn, and also seeing high levels of inflation is concerning that we're looking to spend more money. As a lot of you, it's no secret, Senator Scott's been very, very concerned about recent legislative packages that have contained billions and billions of dollars, some of which he had to support, knowing that there are some that are very much needed, others that we had various concerns about, and we probably did not have much of a stake in trying to have some conversations about making that better. So I think if his standpoint is we have to do this much better, much more careful, and much more deliberative than what we've seen.
Thanks, Louise. I think, we've come towards the end of Louise's time. And I know we've got some folks kind of leaving the call. So Madeline or Chynna, do you have any sort of kind of wrap up comments you'd like to provide?
I'll get to Madeline, but I just wanted to essentially just say thank you. Louise, we're going to remain in relationship with you because a few points needed further discussion. I know that we probably want to circle back with the health care team that you have. So know that question is coming to you later to at least provide an email for a lot of our leaders on the call so that they can follow up as well. But Madeline, I saw you got off, so I'll kick it to you.
Now, I'd say if you can stay on a few moments and we'll debrief some of these ideas and see if there's a chance to have some follow-up strategies. So with that, I'll thank you for joining us. You did an excellent job. Very impressed. GP and Chynna, thank you for leading the conversation. Allies, thank you for your insightful comments in the chat box. We'll make sure that Luis gets some of those that were shared that he may not have had a chance to read. And we look forward to continuing to connect you with our leaders in DC who are doing this vital work and helping to lead on policy issues. So with that, everyone have a great day, a great weekend. Stay cool. Very cool. And good luck with everything, folks. Bye.